The year was 1540. Beneath the glittering facade of Hampton Court Palace, a horror story was unfolding, one that would make even the most twisted fairy tale seem tame by comparison. While courtiers danced and diplomats smiled, one woman found herself trapped in a nightmare of royal cruelty. It began not with treason or adultery, but with something far more devastating in the eyes of a Tudor king. She had failed to arouse his desire. Anne of Cleves arrived in England as a bride, a diplomatic prize meant to secure Protestant alliances and strengthen Henry VIII against his Catholic enemies. What she became was something far more sinister, a living symbol of royal contempt. A woman whose only crime was existing in the wrong body, at the wrong time. This is not the sanitized story of the lucky wife who kept her head. This is the brutal truth of systematic humiliation, calculated cruelty, and a king whose own rotting flesh projected its corruption onto an innocent woman. Today, we're diving deep into one of history's most misunderstood royal disasters. The tale of how Henry VIII transformed a respectable German princess into a figure of ridicule, and how she survived by accepting a degradation that would have broken lesser souls. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why Anne of Cleves represents not just a personal tragedy, but the complete moral bankruptcy of Tudor England itself. But before we witness the destruction of a woman's dignity, we must understand the monster who orchestrated it. By 1539, Henry VIII had become something barely recognizable as human. The athletic young king who once dazzled European courts was now a walking corpse. His massive frame was supported by mechanical aids, his legs wept pus and blood through silk stockings. The sweet smell of decay followed him through palace corridors, as courtiers learned to breathe through their mouths in his presence. Medical experts, analyzing contemporary accounts, paint a horrifying picture. Henry likely suffered from osteomyelitis, a bone infection causing excruciating agony and foul-smelling discharge. His physicians, without any understanding of bacteria, could only bandage the wounds and prescribe opium, which further clouded his already unstable judgment. This combination of physical torment and narcotic fog created a ruler who was both dangerous and utterly unpredictable. The king's medical condition affected far more than his mobility. The chronic infection likely disrupted his hormones and circulation, making intimate relations difficult, if not impossible. Yet Henry's massive ego prevented any acknowledgement of this reality. Instead, he blamed his wives for his own physical limitations, creating psychological defenses that transformed his symptoms into moral judgments about feminine adequacy. This was the diseased tyrant who would soon pass judgment on Anne of Cleves, projecting his own bodily corruption onto a woman whose only failing was her inability to restore his shattered masculinity. Meanwhile, in the German Duchy of Cleves, a 24-year-old woman was preparing for the role of her life. And had been raised in the disciplined court of her brother, Duke Wilhelm. She was educated in languages, music, and the diplomatic graces expected of a noble wife. She understood duty above personal feelings, a trait that would prove both her salvation and her curse in the treacherous world of Tudor politics. The political necessity driving T.'s marriage cannot be overstated. England stood isolated in Europe, threatened by a Catholic alliance between France and the Holy Roman Empire. Henry's break with Rome had cost him crucial allies. The Protestant German states offered salvation, and Anne was the key to this alliance. Her brother commanded respect among Lutheran princes, making this marriage not a romantic theater, but a matter of national survival. Yet, even as diplomats negotiated, Henry's personal anxieties were poisoning the arrangement. The once confident king now struggled with deep insecurities about his physical decline. He demanded constant validation of his desirability, while being less capable of the intimate performance that might justify it. The stage was set for disaster before Anne ever set foot on English soil. The first crack in this doomed union appeared through art. Hans Holbein's portrait of Anne sealed her fate before they even met. The court painter, renowned for his realism, captured the Duchess in traditional Germanic attire, her face serene and dignified. To modern eyes, she appears pleasant, even attractive. But Henry's expectations had been inflamed by diplomatic flattery and his own desperate need for validation. The king studied that portrait obsessively, building fantasies no mortal woman could fulfill. His courtiers, knowing what their monarch wanted to hear, embellished the painting's promise with lavish descriptions of Anne's beauty and virtue. They spoke of skin like fresh cream and sparkling eyes, creating an impossible standard that would doom Anne before she ever reached England. When Anne's entourage finally reached English shores in December 1539, they brought the hopes of two nations. The Duchess had prepared for months to become Queen of England. She had studied English customs, practiced the language, and learned new dance steps to please her husband. Her dowry chests overflowed with Germanic treasures, representing her family's wealth and status. The meeting at Rochester shattered all illusions in a single, catastrophic moment. Henry, disguised as a humble messenger in what he believed was a romantic gesture, burst into Anne's chambers. He expected to surprise and delight his bride. Instead, he encountered a woman who failed to recognize him and, worse still, failed to swoon at his presence. Anne, raised in a more formal Germanic court, responded with polite confusion rather than passionate recognition. This cultural misunderstanding became the first crack. Where Henry expected instant attraction and grateful submission, he found dignified bewilderment. The woman before him failed to validate his mythology of irresistible masculinity. Henry's immediate revulsion was palpable. His face darkened with barely contained fury. The marriage would proceed, diplomatic obligations demanded it, but Henry's cruel campaign against Anne's reputation began that very day. The whispers started immediately. Courtiers who had praised the union now murmured about the bride's foreign ways, her unfamiliarity with English customs, her failure to meet the sovereign's refined expectations. These weren't spontaneous reactions, but calculated acts of political theater, designed to justify Henry's own inadequacies. The wedding ceremony on January 6, 1540, unfolded like a funeral masquerading as a celebration. Henry stood resplendent in cloth of gold, despite his deteriorating health, while Anne wore magnificent robes that could not disguise the king's obvious disgust. Anne maintained regal composure, trained in duty above personal feeling. Yet she could not have comprehended the depths of English court cruelty that awaited. That night, the royal bedchamber became a theater of shame. Henry, whose body now resembled a walking corpse, approached the marriage bed with no enthusiasm. His leg ulcers, wrapped in stinking bandages, leaked through the silk sheets. He blamed Anne for his own physical revulsion. The king found himself impotent before a woman whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unable to acknowledge his own decay, Henry crafted a narrative of feminine inadequacy. He complained to physicians about Anne's body, invented stories about her smell, and suggested her foreign nature had corrupted him. These lies, whispered in royal chambers and repeated by sycophantic courtiers, transformed a woman's dignity into public entertainment. The court's treatment of Anne revealed the systematic cruelty of Tudor governance. Courtiers mocked her Germanic accent with theatrical exaggeration. They ridiculed her unfamiliarity with English customs, turning every cultural difference into evidence of her inadequacy. Even her perfumes became fodder for cruel jokes. Ladies-in-waiting transformed into spies and saboteurs, reporting every perceived flaw to Henry's eager ears. The Queen was isolated in a nest of vipers. Henry's courtiers competed to devise new insults that would validate his rejection. Her clothing was too foreign, her manners too Germanic. These attacks were not spontaneous xenophobia, but calculated political theater. The transformation from queen to scapegoat happened with terrifying speed. Pamphlets appeared, suggesting Germanic women were inherently unsuitable for English men. Court poets crafted verses celebrating native-born beauties. This propaganda campaign normalized Henry's rejection and prepared the public for the annulment everyone knew must come. Worse than the public humiliation was the private torment. Royal physicians examined Anne's body for evidence of the defects Henry claimed to perceive. These intimate violations, under the guise of medical necessity, represented the ultimate degradation. The reports, carefully crafted to support Henry's narrative, were preserved as evidence of Anne's unsuitability. Henry's physicians, terrified of blaming the king's health, collaborated in blaming external factors. They diagnosed Anne with imaginary conditions, suggesting Germanic humors had corrupted the king's vitality. These medical opinions show how professional knowledge was subordinated to political necessity in Tudor England. The progression of Henry's illness was tracked through diplomatic accounts, which noted his increasing isolation and erratic behavior. Foreign ambassadors reported that audiences required preparation to mask the smell of his wounds. English courtiers developed protocols for maintaining a respectful distance. All while Anne bore the blame for the sovereign's evident physical corruption. While Anne endured her public crucifixion, Henry turned his attention to Catherine Howard, a teenage girl whose youth promised the validation his ego desperately required. Catherine, barely out of childhood, became the instrument of Anne's final humiliation. The king's pursuit of his fifth wife began before his fourth marriage was formally dissolved. Catherine Howard represented everything and was not: young, English, and inexperienced. Airy existence served as a rebuke to Anne's adequacy. Court observers noted how the king's demeanor brightened whenever Catherine appeared, while his interactions with Anne grew cold. The speed of Henry's pursuit revealed the calculated nature of his rejection. He had decided to rid himself of Anne almost immediately after their wedding. Anne's position became increasingly precarious. Forced to attend court functions where her husband's new obsession was the center of attention, she had to smile and participate in her own replacement. Her diplomatic training now served only to help her manage her own destruction with grace. European courts watched with fascination and horror. The Holy Roman Emperor used Anne's humiliation as evidence of English barbarism. French courtiers crafted entertainments mocking Henry's inability to consummate his marriage. The Protestant German states viewed Anne's rejection as a personal insult that threatened the entire Reformation cause. Duke Wilhelm of Cleves considered breaking his alliance with England a move that would have left the kingdom completely isolated. Only Anne's own letters, urging patience and restraint, prevented this catastrophic realignment. Spanish ambassadors reported that Henry's treatment of Anne revealed fundamental instabilities in the English succession, suggesting the country was vulnerable to reconquest for the Catholic faith. The machinery of annulment began grinding forward with ruthless efficiency. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of Anne's marriage, now found himself tasked with its destruction, a cruel irony that would cost him his life. Legal scholars scoured canon law for precedents, theologians crafted arguments about consummation and consent. Parliamentary committees investigated the marriage's validity with predetermined outcomes, interviewing witnesses who knew what testimony would preserve their positions. Anne's foreign birth became evidence of impediments. Henry's claims of non-consummation were accepted without question. The legal proceedings resembled show trials. The most insidious aspect was how Anne's cooperation was used as evidence of her inadequacy. When she agreed to testify about the non-consummation, court observers called it an unnatural willingness. When she remained silent, it was proof of her foreign inability to understand English emotion. Religious authorities, terrified of contradicting Henry after the fates of Thomas More and John Fisher, provided eager theological justification. Bishops who had celebrated Anne's Protestant faith now discovered impediments in her Germanic religious practices. The speed of their reversal revealed the complete corruption of institutional integrity. Anne's survival was not passive endurance, but an active campaign of intelligence and strategic relationship building. During her brief marriage, she cultivated relationships with German merchants, Protestant reformers, and English nobles who saw Henry's treatment of her as a sign of royal instability. These networks would prove crucial. The Germanic merchant communities in London watched Anne's humiliation with horror. These merchants, who controlled significant portions of England's trade and banking, quietly supported Anne through advantageous property deals and information. Their subtle support provided her with an economic independence far beyond Henry's official settlement. Anne's correspondence reveals a politically astute woman. She maintained careful communicati. on with her brother and other German princes, providing intelligence about English politics while never crossing into espionage. She had to appear loyal to English interests while secretly serving as an informal ambassador for Protestant German states. Her household at Richmond Palace became an unofficial embassy. She provided legal advice, financial aid, and political protection for German nationals in England. These activities were conducted with such discretion that English authorities remained unaware, allowing Anne to build a power base outside official control. The terms of Anne's surrender were surprisingly generous, reflecting Henry's relief at avoiding another bloody spectacle and his fear of political consequences. She would retain the title the King's sister, receive substantial lands and income, and maintain a position of honor as long as she never challenged the annulment's validity. In exchange, she would publicly acknowledge the marriage was never valid, that she remained a virgin, and that Henry's rejection stemmed from legitimate concerns, not personal caprice. This bargain was a masterpiece of political calculation. Anne had observed the fates of Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. She understood that defiance led to destruction, while submission offered survival. Her Germanic upbringing taught her to value practical outcomes over emotional satisfaction. The signing of the annulment agreement occurred with ceremonial dignity that masked its brutality. Anne, dressed in the rich robes her marriage had provided, formally renounced all claims to queenly status. Henry's commissioners praised her wisdom, but the document she signed contained clauses acknowledging her own inadequacy and gratitude for Henry's mercy. These forced confessions would cement Henry's narrative for posterity. Foreign diplomats observed with horror, recognizing the implications. If Henry could destroy a woman who committed no crime beyond disappointing him, what mercy could other foreign allies expect? Anne's humiliation served as a warning about the dangers of trusting Tudor promises. On July 9, 1540, the same day Parliament formally annulled Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves, Thomas Cromwell was executed on Tower Hill. The minister who arranged the Cleves alliance paid with his life for his diplomatic success, while Anne dined safely at Richmond Palace. The woman had survived by accepting humiliation. The man who served faithfully was destroyed for doing his job too well. Cromwell's death served multiple purposes. It provided a scapegoat for the diplomatic embarrassment, satisfied public anger, and demonstrated royal power. His execution also eliminated the one person who knew all the details of how Henry's rejection of Anne was orchestrated. The speed of Cromwell's fall revealed the precarious nature of power under Henry. No service could guarantee survival when the king's ego required a sacrifice. Anne, watching from her new home, understood that her survival depended on remaining invisible. Meanwhile, Henry married Catherine Howard with obscene haste, on the very day of Cromwell's execution. The juxtaposition was deliberate: death and renewal, punishment and reward. Anne was expected to attend the wedding celebrations to smile and offer congratulations to the girl who had replaced her. It was one final humiliation. Anne's transformation from queen to the king's sister represented a social resurrection. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, who died in exile, or Anne Boleyn, who met the scaffold, and found a way to maintain dignity and security. Her new status, while humiliating, provided freedoms queenship never offered: freedom from Henry's presence, from constant surveillance, and from deadly politics. Her estates provided not just economic security, but genuine independence rare for any woman in 16th-century England. The irony was bitter but undeniable: rejection had liberated her from a fate that might have ended in execution. Anne's management of her estates revealed business skills that contradicted assumptions about feminine capability. She negotiated favorable leases, invested in agricultural improvements, and diversified her income. Her account books show a woman who understood complex economics. Her investments introduced continental farming techniques that improved productivity and provided employment. These innovations demonstrated a practical intelligence that belied Henry's characterization of her as inferior. And also invested in commercial ventures connecting English and German markets. Her involvement in the wool trade and luxury goods created wealth that made her independent of royal favor. Her financial success enabled charitable activities that enhanced her reputation among ordinary English people. She funded schools, hospitals, and religious institutions, creating genuine popular support. The court's treatment of Anne in her new role revealed complex social dynamics. As the king's sister, she had ceremonial precedence but was excluded from real influence. She attended court when summoned but remained essentially invisible. This invisibility became her protection. Foreign visitors often remarked on Anne's dignified bearing during court appearances. She had mastered the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, present enough to fulfill obligations, but insignificant enough to avoid dangerous attention. This balance required constant vigilance and remarkable strength. During her years as the king's sister, Anne underwent a personal transformation. She mastered English completely, becoming fluent enough to conduct complex negotiations. Her household accounts show expenses for English tutors and cultural instructors, and developed genuine friendships with English noble families who admired her dignity and intelligence. The Howards and Seymours invited her to private gatherings where she could participate without royal protocol. These relationships provided emotional support and political protection. Her interests expanded to patronage. She funded translation projects bringing German theological works into English, supported poets and musicians fleeing religious persecution, and corresponded with humanist scholars across Europe who valued her intelligence. Inventories of her possessions reveal a woman who synthesized German and English cultural elements. Her clothing blended Germanic cut with English decoration, her furnishings mixed continental craftsmanship with English comfort. This was not capitulation, but creative adaptation. Despite her official exclusion from power, Anne wielded considerable informal influence. English nobles used her as an unofficial channel to communicate with continental allies, trusting her discretion and linguistic skills. This role gave her access to information many official courtiers lacked. During Edward VI's minority, Anne's Protestant credentials and continental connections made her valuable to reform factions. She advised on religious policy, facilitated communication between English and German theologians, and helped negotiate complex diplomatic relationships. Her household became a gathering place for moderate Protestant voices who valued her theological sophistication. These informal salons influenced English religious development in ways traditional histories have overlooked. Her careful neutrality during the succession crisis after Henry's death demonstrated political wisdom. While others committed to factions and risked destruction, and maintained cordial relationships with all parties. This strategic ambiguity served her well as England lurched between Protestant extremism under Edward and Catholic restoration under Mary. Anne's survival strategy proved its wisdom as Henry's reign grew unstable. She watched as Catherine Howard was arrested, tried, and executed within 18 months of her wedding. The girl used as a weapon against and became another victim of Henry's murderous impulses. Her destruction was grim validation of Anne's choice to submit. Had Anne resisted the annulment or rallied foreign support, she would have likely met the same fate. Instead, her pragmatic acceptance purchased not just survival, but genuine security. As Henry aged, Anne's position improved. The king's attention turned to his final wife, Catherine Parr, while his earlier marriages faded into uncomfortable memories. Anne's quiet dignity had gradually rehabilitated her reputation among courtiers who once participated in her humiliation. The contrast between Anne's thriving independence and Henry's accelerating decay grew starker. While she built a network of relationships and economic security, the king who rejected her continued his grotesque decline. His leg ulcers spread, requiring desperate medical interventions. Physicians applied poultices containing everything from boiled onions to powdered human skull, desperate remedies reflecting Tudor medicine's limitations. Liberal opium use dulled his pain but clouded his deteriorating mind, creating episodes of near delirium. The psychological torment matched the physical. The man who had blamed Anne for his inadequacies was forced to confront the reality that the corruption resided within himself. Meanwhile, Anne's transformation continued. Her correspondence established her as a significant intellectual figure. Her translations of German theology influenced English Protestant thought. The economic empire she built through careful investment provided resources many English nobles envied. Her estates became models of efficient agriculture, demonstrating innovations that would influence English farming for generations. The woman dismissed as a foreign incompetent had proven herself superior to most native administrators. Her charitable foundations created a network of schools, hospitals, and religious institutions across southern England. These establishments bore her name and carried forward her values. While Henry's other wives were remembered for their relationships to the king, Anne was building something entirely her own. Henry VIII's death in January 1547 marked a transition and was prepared for. Unlike those tied to the dying king's favor, her independence positioned her well for the new reign. Edward VI's Protestant government valued her continental connections, and her reputation for wisdom made her a trusted figure. Anne's relationship with Mary Tudor, despite their religious differences, demonstrated her ability to transcend sectarian divisions. Mary respected Anne's intelligence and diplomatic experience, seeking her counsel on German and continental politics. This relationship protected Anne during the violent religious reversals of Mary's reign. When Anne died peacefully in 1557, her funeral arrangements reflected her complete transformation from object of ridicule to figure of respect. Her burial in Westminster Abbey was attended by nobility and foreign diplomats who recognized her remarkable journey. The woman publicly degraded by a tyrant was laid to rest with royal honors. More significantly, Anne had achieved something none of Henry's other wives could claim: she defeated the Tudor king not through confrontation, but through endurance. She proved that the greatest victory lies not in fighting monsters, but in refusing to become one. Her survival was a moral victory over the tyranny and deception that defined Henry's reign. The historical legacy of Anne of Cleves has been shaped by centuries of historians who accepted Henry's narrative, perpetuating myths about the inadequate foreign queen. Modern scholarship now pierces these lies, revealing a woman systematically destroyed by a king whose body and mind were corrupted beyond redemption. The real stench in the Tudor court came not from Anne, but from Henry's ulcerated legs and diseased soul. The rot belonged to the English king whose vanity and cruelty poisoned everyone around him. In choosing life over martyrdom, Anne achieved something transcendent. Her story is a testament to strategic thinking, patient endurance, and moral courage. While Henry rotted from within, Anne built a life of dignity, purpose, and genuine achievement that outlasted the tyrant who tried to destroy her. The woman forced to accept humiliation as the price of survival achieved an immortality her tormentor could never claim. Her legacy lived on in the institutions she founded, the people she helped, and the example she set. In the end, the joke was on Henry VIII. His diseased body and twisted mind made him the very thing he falsely accused Anne of being. The final scorecard of this Tudor tragedy is clear. While Henry lay rotting in his tomb at Windsor, his body so bloated that his lead coffin reportedly burst from decomposing gases, and thrived for another decade. The king who blamed her for his inadequacies became a monument to decay. The woman he humiliated built a legacy of respect. History is finally correcting the record. There was a foul stench surrounding this marriage, but it never came from Anne of Cleves. The corruption, the disease, the moral rot belonged entirely to Henry VIII. His festering wounds and diseased mind created the horror he projected onto an innocent woman. Anne's ultimate victory was not just personal, but philosophical. She proved dignity could survive humiliation, that intelligence could triumph over brute power, and that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply outliving your enemies while building something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. The woman dismissed as inadequate became a model of competence. The king who rejected her became history's example of absolute power corrupting absolutely. So the next time someone calls Anne of Cleves the lucky wife who escaped with her head, remember the full truth. She didn't just survive Henry VIII, she defeated him completely, achieving through patience and wisdom what no any of his other queens could. The smell of dead fish that supposedly surrounded Anne was nothing more than the projection of a dying tyrant's own putrid soul.